Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the virtual town hall for Moreno Valley. It is being presented today by Fair Housing Council, Riverside County. Now, today's town hall is made possible through the Fair Housing Initiative Program and an education and outreach federal grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. For this morning's virtual town hall, we are pleased to welcome as panelists from the City of Moreno Valley, Marshall Eierman. Marshall currently serves as the City of Moreno Valley's Assistant City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, and City Treasurer, ensuring taxpayers are continuing to receive the highest quality services in the most cost-efficient manner while maintaining a balanced budget. Marshall has over 25 years of experience in administrative, financial, operational, and program management in both the public and private sectors. Marshall has been with the City of Moreno Valley for almost 13 years. Our next panelist has been a housing advocate in Southern California for the last 7 years. Carl Wallen started as a volunteer for the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino and has since become a practicing housing attorney for Inland County Legal Services and has assisted numerous clients with unlawful detainer at all stages of representation. From the Fair Housing Council of Riverside County, we are joined by testing coordinator and fair housing investigator, Richard Lemire. Richard joined Fair Housing Council in 2015 and has held several positions during his tenure. Prior to joining the Fair Housing Council, Richard served as the Senior Public Information Specialist for Community Action Partnership of Riverside County, where he was responsible for all community and media relations. And last but certainly not least, Mike Nagay, Public Affairs and Riverside Area Manager of Southern California Rental Housing Association. Mike has been managing and coordinating the SCRHA's advocacy and public affairs activities since 2014. He's responsible for disseminating and communicating information to SCRHA members on current events, industry trends, legislative and regulatory issues affecting the rental housing industry. And for this morning, I am your host and moderator for today's town hall. My name is Nathan Szynski, and I'm the program manager for Fair Housing Council Riverside County. I've worked within the fair housing industry for the past 8 years after almost 13 years in the mortgage industry. Now we'll begin this morning with opening statements from each of our panelists. We will then be moving into our panel discussion, at which time each panelist will be presented with a question and the other panelists will be allowed time to add or contribute additional information if they would like. Attendees at this time are in listen-only mode. If you have questions at any time, please enter them into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the panel discussion, we will open for public questions. If you would like to ask your question live, please indicate so in the Q&A panel. You will then be taken off mute to ask your question. We will get to as many of the typed questions as we possibly can. Please note that the virtual town hall is being recorded for later broadcast. And at this time, I would like to invite Richard Lemire to begin with his opening statements.
All right. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you all for joining us today. And the Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is a nonprofit housing counseling agency whose primary mission is to prevent discrimination in housing. The Fair Housing Act was signed by President Lyndon Johnson in 1968, 1 week after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, national origin, sex, religion, disability, and familial status. These are called protected classes, and the state of California has added an additional set of protected classes that are protected by state law. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County identifies discrimination primarily through the phone calls that it receives. We receive an average of 60 to 90 calls daily at our 3 offices in Riverside County. When discrimination is alleged or uncovered, Fair Housing Council of Riverside County investigates the complaint and then refers it to an enforcement agency, either the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, or a private attorney. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is not an enforcement agency. The bulk of the calls received are for landlord-tenant issues. Our counselors advise the callers as to their rights and refer them to the appropriate resources when required. There are occasions when discrimination is identified by the trained counselors. Many times our clients do not even realize that they are being discriminated against. Our agency provides fair housing services to the County of Riverside, as well as 10 cities in the county that receive Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG, directly from HUD. These are called Entitlement Communities. The City of Moreno Valley is one of the entitlement communities that we are contracted with. Our relationship with Moreno Valley goes back to the founding of the city in the 1980s. Other services that we provide are first-time homebuyer counseling, as well as one-on-one counseling for homeowners that are facing foreclosure. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County conducts informal administrative hearings on behalf of the housing authorities of Riverside and San Bernardino counties for Section 8 tenant grievances. We also provide training and technical assistance, including fair housing training for government, community organizations, business groups, including realtors who are mandated to complete fair housing education. Through the Fair Housing Initiative Program's Private Enforcement Initiative, or FHIP Grant, Fair Housing Council of Riverside County conducts housing discrimination audits and tests, which result in discrimination cases being referred to HUD, DFEH, or private attorneys. Another component of the FHIP grant is education and outreach, and these town hall meetings are being conducted under the auspices of the FHIP grant, as well as providing service to our contracted communities. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is pleased to have you join us today.
Thank you, Rick. I would also like to invite Marshall Ironman to open with his opening statements.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, my role right now at the city is the Assistant City Manager, Chief Financial Officer. And within the city of Moreno Valley, we've got a population of about 214,000 individuals. We are an entitlement city under HUD's guidelines, and so we do receive allocations each year, whether it's the Community Development Block Grants, the Emergency Solution Grants, or home investments. Previously, we had received redevelopment dollars through different tax increment. As that dissolved in the state, our roles kind of transitioned into more of a monitoring and mitigation of those properties as we move forward. But what we do with a lot of those areas and some of the operations that fall under me are our grant compliance and monitoring. So as Richard mentioned, we do fund fair housing through a component of that, but we also fund many other organizations that support, all of our population, whether it's through U.S. Vets, Salvation Army, Lutheran Social Services, Family Service Association, and many of these dollars from the city actually go into rental assistance, food and nutrition programs, transportation programs, abuse prevention, court-appointed advocates, and then even some of our homeless to work programs, as we're trying to not only protect individuals and their households, but make sure that individuals have the opportunities to obtain housing within our community. Currently, we have, the city monitors about 1,200 affordable housing units, and then as we look towards the future, what we're always doing is working with developers to seek additional funding through tax credits, through banks, through any money that's available through the city's home funds, and really focus on continuing to provide affordable housing within our community. Even one item we're working on right now is our general plan amendment, and that general plan amendment looks at the opportunities to kind of meet the regional housing needs assessments and really what the demands are in the future moving forward. So that's just a quick introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall. Next up, I would like to invite Carl Wallen to open with his opening comments.
Good morning, everyone. I'm attorney Carl Wallen. I work with Inland County's Legal Services. Our mission statement here at ICLS is pursuing justice and equality for low-income people through advocacy and community education, treating all with dignity and respect. ICLS is a nonprofit 501c3 corporation. We provide legal assistance to low-income individuals, families, and seniors free of charge. ICLS serves San Bernardino and Riverside counties with offices throughout both counties. Obviously, this does include Moreno Valley. We have numerous offices scattered throughout both San Bernardino and Riverside counties. The first and perhaps best way to get a hold of us, especially during COVID-19, If you do need assistance with a legal issue, is by calling us toll free at 1-888-245-4257. You, of course, do have to be eligible for our services. You do have to meet income eligibility. There's a threshold of income that you cannot exceed in order to receive our services, and your legal issue does have to be within one of the priority issues that our board of directors has identified. There are also citizenship requirements for our services. You can expect assistance in the following areas. We have a housing practice group, so anything related to housing is something you can be assisted with. We have a family law practice group, a public benefits practice group, a health law practice group, consumer tax and bankruptcy group, an immigration group, and an education group, as well as a systemic impact group. So that concludes this opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move into now the panel discussion, and Fair Housing Council Riverside County gathered together certain questions that our callers, oh, I'm sorry.
You forgot Mike.
Skipping Mike.
Mike Nagy, you're up. Sorry.
No, that's perfectly fine. Anything with the discussion along. So my name is Mike Nagy. I'm the Public Affairs Manager and the Riverside Area Manager for the Southern California Rental Housing Association. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a membership-based trade organization representing property managers, supplier members, or vendors who provide goods and services to the rental housing sector, rental housing professionals, and also independent rental owners. So our territory covers all of San Diego and Imperial counties and a significant portion of Riverside County, basically from Temecula-Murrieta, stretching northward up towards southern portions of Moreno Valley, Hemet, San Jacinto, and then eastward into the Coachella Valley, into the cities of Palm Springs, Coachella, what have you. We don't cover Blythe, so that would be quite a drive for us. So our organization, so we represent approximately 1,400 members and over 150,000 rental units. And so we provide basically business development marketing opportunities for our members. We provide also representation and advocacy in issues related to housing, to rental housing. And also, we also have a strong education component for our members, whether they be the independent landlords, property managers, other rental housing professionals. And so a lot of our classes, we conduct them throughout the year. They range from a broad range of topics, everything from regulatory and legislative updates, also in addition to also fair housing. And as a matter of fact, our organization, we also celebrate Fair Housing Month in the month of April. So in terms of our membership, about 70% of our members are what we refer to as the independent landlords, the mom and pops, so to speak. And we classify those members of those who own and operate 15 or fewer rental units. So we provide education, we provide industry research. We have also counselors available to ask non-legal questions to answer non-legal questions, anything regarding landlord and tenant issues. And I'll stop right there.
All right, thank you so much. Now we are actually going to move into the panel discussion. And the questions that we have collected have been received from the callers that call into Fair Housing Council of Riverside County. We've gathered quite a few of the most prominent questions, and I will be presenting it to a question to each of the panelists and then open it up for discussion between the four of them. First question this morning is going to go to Richard. And the question is, since COVID-19 began, have there been any emerging trends in terms of discrimination that people need to be aware of?
Okay. Well, Nathan, yes, it has been actually some market increases in sectors of discrimination that had not been quite as prevalent since the time of COVID. And this would be calls that have come from month of March on. And we have seen an uptick in race discrimination, also in physical disability. We've always had, mental disability issues, but physical disability has come into play. And most alarming is discrimination based on sex. And this would be verbal sexual harassment, physical harassment, visual harassment. And these are with tenants that have been subjected to this type of activity from either managers or maintenance personnel on the properties. And it just seems that with everybody so closed in, there may be more opportunities for this type of abuse. But nationally, the sexual discrimination is on the radar of all fair housing agencies. So it's not surprising that that this is happening, but it is it's very, very concerning to us as an agency.
Are there particular groups that you would recognize as maybe being more prone to being subjective to sexual harassment?
Well, certainly single women and low-income women and women of color. And the more vulnerable they are, the more likely they are to face this type of harassment. And with so many of the single head of household residents of low income being subjected to all the other problems of COVID, this is another thing that is added to their miseries.
Thank you. Has any panel heard or seen any issues regarding sexual harassment going on the rise since COVID-19? All right, so we will move on to the next question. This next question is going to be directed to Carl. And it's a very popular question that we get here in our office, and I'm hoping in general terms you'll be able to explain it. And that question is, what exactly does AB 3088 cover, and what must the tenant do to be covered by AB 3088?
Okay, quite the question. Anybody that's that has either already taken a look or has a burning desire to Google it right now will see quite the lengthy bit of legislation if you were to type in 3088 into your little Google search bar there. So I'm going to do my best to cover some of the main points of 3088 in this question. I certainly will not be able to cover every little tidbit found in 3088. So let's begin. Perhaps the most noteworthy provision in AB 3088 that went into effect this September is that if you are behind in your payment of the rent, you can put forth a declaration to your landlord indicating that you're suffering a COVID-19 financial hardship, and send that to your landlord, which will give you protections and unlawful detainer. Unlawful detainer is, of course, a fancy legal way of saying eviction. So if you're finding yourself having a hard time paying the rent, and it's some kind of reason related to COVID-19. Now, I'd like to elaborate on this point. It doesn't necessarily mean you got sick with COVID-19. It could mean that because of the pandemic itself, because the entire nation is facing this pandemic, your job may have reduced hours. Your job may have let you go. You may have trouble finding a job. There are any number of reasons why you could be suffering a COVID-19 financial hardship that might make you eligible for this declaration. With that said, please, if you are considering doing such a declaration to your landlord, please carefully review the language of the declaration. Please make sure it is truthful. Please make sure it is accurate when you sign it and submit it to your landlord, as there may be consequences, detrimental consequences to yourself if you were to sign the declaration and it be untruthful. That's perhaps the most noteworthy provision of AB 3088, the one that everyone's talking about, the one that's protecting perhaps the most people from eviction, especially for lack of payment of rent. Now, there are minutiae of AB 3088 that, of course, make it a bit more messy than how I'm describing it now. In most cases, you're going to have to do this declaration every single month to your landlord. In addition, for rent starting this month, in the month of September, and continuing on, I believe until the end of January, you'll be responsible for paying 25% of your total rent to your landlord. Failure to do so may indeed result in an eviction later. So it's not a complete absolution of your payment of rent, but it is a significant chunk. The landlord can, of course, still go after you for that amount, that 75% delinquent amount, but the only way you can do so is in small claims, not via eviction, which is powerful. It might mean that you might get to stay in your home. Maybe you do owe your landlord, maybe you do eventually have to pay him a judgment, but you can stay home and not get evicted. The other major chunk of AB 3088 relates to California evictions requiring cause for everyone. Under AB, I believe it was 1482, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, there were cause requirements placed in the state of California for most evictions, but not all. Now, AB 3088 encompasses virtually everyone except for commercial tenancies. I believe is the one exception, but that's not likely to apply to too many people on this call. So for the most part, landlords will need cause to evict you. In most cases, it will need to be just cause to evict you, fault cause. There are some limited exceptions where it can be no fault of your own and you still get evicted, unfortunately. But that probably exceeds the scope of this question. I'm more than happy to elaborate on any additional points of 3088, but I think I would be dominating this call if I were to go any further. I don't.
Yeah.
We may come back to that one because I do think there are some questions with that. But let's go ahead and move over to Marshall. And one of the questions, Marshall, that we receive here at Fair Housing Council Riverside County is people looking for resources in the city of Moreno Valley. So what programs and resources are located in Moreno Valley, and which programs is the city working with? So we can help all of our residents in Moreno Valley to find the help that they need in a time of crisis.
Okay. Well, as everybody kind of has a different issue that we're always addressing, we've got to look at those specific items. And so we've tried to fund or put in place multiple different programs. So starting with, at least from the county perspective, as we're part of Riverside County has rental assistance programs and all of those items that they run through. As Fair Housing is part of this call, we'll note that we partner with them in many things, so it's just getting to solutions in those situations. But many of the things that we're addressed with right now is, as we mentioned on AB 3088, is it's the shortfall of rent, the disability to pay rent. We've set up a couple different programs through Salvation Army, Lutheran Social Services, and U.S. Vets that provide some short-term financial assistance, whether it's part of the rent or whether it's some of the utilities, because if somebody's having a financial difficulty, it's not just the rent that they're looking at. We had an extremely hot summer, and so those electric bills add up as well. So we have a couple different programs that way that's set up. What council just approved on September 1st is a new rental assistance program. So we're in the process of setting that up. And so that's some of these CARES dollars that are coming from the federal government. As they reach the city, we're able to kind of reinvest these into the programs. We're actually able to stretch it some into the commercial side. I know we're not on this, but on the housing side, this rental assistance program, in addition to the short-term vouchers, will be great. Now that program, we're still setting up some of the items. As I said, the council approved it. We have to go through a contract with HUD once that's established. It'll mirror pretty much kind of a program that's set up with the county with the United Way or the Uplift program. And that'll be coming out. And then we're looking to get additional CARES dollars in the future. And we'll be seeing what we can do to expand some of these programs as needed or based on demands.
Are there any programs either that you know of or that the city works with that provides assistance with food? Because that is another area where people are struggling with.
Mm-hmm. In food, there are multiple things. So actually through COVID, we did have a meal program that we established. So as our parks were shut down and everything else was closed, we shifted our parks program into a mobile meals program. Unfortunately, that has stopped at the moment. So in that kind of dire situation, we were addressing the low-income households, the seniors, individuals with disabilities, and doing delivery there. Right now, we currently have a senior meals program where we're working with the restaurants to deliver meals 5 days a week to those individuals. That's still in place through our Family Service Association, or FSA. We're still doing meals delivered out of our senior center. And then it goes down the normal path of where we're partnering with, whether it's Salvation Army or some of the other food banks in town, making sure that those are available. And I know that there's a lot of organizations that we work with, and one of the things is on our city's website, this grant operations, they're really under the financial and management services. There's a grant tab there. That'll give you a spreadsheet that has all of these organizations listed and can point them to different areas. The other thing that we do is, because there are so many nonprofits, we actually had a nonprofit roundtable meeting this morning where we try to coordinate some of these activities going on. But we created a resource guide of the nonprofits that's on our website as well. Also on a booklet that really guides people to where the nonprofits are located and the other resources that are out there.
Very good. Thank you very much. Now, the next question is going to be for Mike. And Mike, the question here is, what is your association requesting from our U.S. representatives and senators?
So it's a good question. So recently, our national affiliate, the National Apartment Association, did over the summer a series of different surveys, and so they polled the members who responded about what are the issues, how has the pandemic affected them, how has it affected their tenants, and some of the information says that what our members are responding, that as long as the government continues to provide stimulus or enhanced unemployment benefits, that renters are continuing to make their rental payments and without any delay. And so one such number says it was high back in June, high as 92%. And so the things that we're talking about, the National Apartment Association, who's lobbying for us, is basically saying, let's continue the stimulus. We need to have a program that can benefit both tenants and landlords. We can't assist one group without assisting the other. And so that could be a form of, and then maybe another round of stimulus potentially. It could be also like a nationwide rental assistance program like you see with the County of Riverside. Just yesterday, the County of San Diego just launched their renter assistance program, where those tenants who were affected, they can apply, they enter in their name in a lottery, and if they meet the income requirements, then they can possibly then receive up to several months of rental payments, and then that rental payment goes directly to the landlord, which is extremely important for especially our small members who rely primarily on that rental income to help maintain and operate their properties. So I would say right now we're waiting to see if once the negotiations are done within Congress, and hopefully there may be something at the state level, but once Congress has seen the details, then we'll go in and see which particular provisions are we going to accept and which ones where we may have questions or concerns with.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a bit more complicated, and it's actually directed to all four panelists. Because this is a subject and a question that has been coming up a lot, and I'd like to get everybody's take on it. So one of the issues that we are getting with our calls is tenants are calling stating that they are renting a single family home and their landlord has decided they don't want to be landlords anymore and they are selling the property. And they're using that as a way to evict tenants. So I'd like, Richard, if you'll start and just talk about some of the issues that we've had coming up, and then if we can pass it through to all the panelists, I'd appreciate it, because I think this is a very important issue.
Yes, this is a call that we received quite a few of these calls in the last few months, and it is in-place renters and their landlord is saying, the house is for sale. And, under the regular state laws, they have to give them a 60-day notice ahead of time so that, that they have time to prepare. And of course, when the eviction moratorium was on, there really was nothing that could be done as far as processing any evictions at the end of those 90 days or 60 days. To verify this, but of course, that does fall under the no-fault eviction if it is a situation where the homeowner is looking to reoccupy that home. They'll say maybe they have lost their housing and they would like to reoccupy that home. But as Nathan has said, this has also just come up as for people to use this as an excuse for eviction. What we counsel our clients to do, is to have that, to understand this 60-day notice, and at all time, to realize that at some point there is going to have to be a change, to at least try to look to relocate. If in the time frame, though, that's really at this time is very, very difficult, because finding housing is very, very difficult. So there's not a lot of opportunities at the end of those 60 days that people actually can relocate. And we need to then see what actual protections do come off as a result of that 60-day notice, and what the landlords and the tenants have as options. And Carl, I'd like to have you expound on that situation.
Sure thing. So you're likely going to see this. You likely have seen this. This is a direct result of AB 3088 carving out a cause for eviction. It's specifically called a no-fault cause, if you want to get fancy with the language of it. But essentially, it does allow cause to evict, even under current existing California law, where a landlord is removing the property from the rental market. You'll also find another closely related no-fault just cause where the landlord is selling the property to another person who intends on residing in that property as their principal home. Those are going to be two causes for eviction under AB 3088 that you see probably often in the very near future, because it is essentially a way to evict people under the current law. This is something for people to keep in mind. I'd like to make two small points. If anyone encounters this in their practice, or God forbid you're a tenant that encounters this. The first is that there are enhanced retaliation penalties if you believe that your landlord is using this as a means to retaliate against you for your lack of payment of rent. This can be utilized as a defense in the eviction. It can also be utilized as a way to seek some kind of financial recovery from the landlord as well. There's higher penalties now for that than there's ever been before. In addition, California law is not the only law that is out there. There is also the federal CDC moratorium that does not allow for many of these no-fault just cause evictions to go through in agencies like mine. Opinion, whether or not the local courts share that opinion is another story, but it's worth mentioning that defense if you find yourself in that position, if for nothing else to preserve your right to appeal later.
Thank you, Carl. And Mike, have you heard anything of homeowners that are basically trying to sell for those very reasons? What kind of guidance can you give from the side of the property owner?
So it's actually kind of interesting. We haven't seen really, at least amongst our members who are contacting us, we're not seeing an uptick in members wanting to sell their home and then try to evict. Now, we've had calls from members actually prior to COVID-19 where our counselors will say, well, just because you're selling the home doesn't necessarily mean you have to evict. You have to evict the tenant. There could be other options, and that really depends upon who's the buyer. And so, yeah, if there's the cases that, the buyer wants to use a primary residence. So we try to have them look at other avenues before, they proceed with a 60-day. One thing that we are actually seeing, at least within our organization, is we have a lot of members who've owned rental property, since the 1970s, and now you're seeing a generational change where the family, the parents, has owned this and operated this property, and now they are either retiring or they've passed away. And now you're seeing the children, the siblings are, now they're acquiring this property, and now they're looking at, the regulatory and all the legislation that has been passed recently, and they're just deciding this is going to be too much of a burden for me to take on this new responsibility, and then they're selling their homes that way. So I think in light of both everything that's going on legislatively, but also we're kind of seeing a generational change amongst our landlords.
And Marshall, from the point of view of the city, have you received any complaints like that from Moreno Valley, or is it something that's on the radar? I know countywide it's an issue, but specifically for Moreno Valley, is it on the city's radar?
It hasn't hit too much on the radar on that aspect. I mean, where we get pulled in a lot is the difficult thing when you're dealing with lower income households and trying to relocate is a financial burden. And so where we get hit up with is relocation assistance. Individuals need those down payments if they're able to find a new spot. And so we kind of come in on that aspect, not so much the legal aspect of the eviction or moving them out, but how we can get them into their next home if possible.
So Richard, what guidance would you give somebody who is facing that, especially given the fact that finding rental properties right now is difficult, just being able to find an apartment or finding a house? If somebody calls in and they're facing that situation, how does Fair Housing Council of Riverside County guide them?
Well, of course, we do, let them know that obviously the situation is probably going to change, that the owner is wanting to sell the house, and that you will probably be required to relocate, as a result of this. It's just a question as far as the timing and what they can reasonably do. But we always want them to know that, to pursue all options to try to find new housing during, since you've been given the notice. But and they also do have the option, if it is a no-fault eviction, that and Carl, if you'll back this up also, that they are to be given the equivalent of a month's rent for relocation assistance, and that is something that is very, very helpful to people facing this situation. And is that a correct assessment, Carl?
I'm very happy you mentioned that. AB 1482 and under AB 3088, if a landlord is going to evict under a no fault just cause, so the landlord does technically have just cause under state of California law, but the tenant didn't do anything wrong. In that situation, most of the time, I believe there are exceptions, but most of the time the tenant is entitled to 1 month's rent relocation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to a different topic. It's also very, it's a lot deeper than what we can handle right now. And it will be initially directed to Richard and Carl, but then I'm going to ask the other two to join in. And it is in regards to repairs. So this is a two-part question. The first part is, how long does a property owner have to respond to and make the necessary repairs on a property?
And we typically, well, the state guidance is 30 days. So once it is reported to the landlord, and we actually advise all of our tenants that are seeking a repair to get it in writing, and actually to send it via certified mail, so that they do have a record of the request. So many times that things are just done through phone, through text messaging and emails, while it is making notice to the landlord, you can actually set a 30-day record based on, on the request being made through certified mail. It's a little bit more cumbersome, but it does protect them. And of course, if it is a very serious issue and an immediate health situation, it would be at least like 3 days. It is a repair that is endangering health.
Thank you, Richard. Carl, from an overview, non-specific legal, because I know you can't give legal advice, but just an overview, what remedies could a tenant expect if those repairs are not made within 30 days, if the landlord just refuses to make those necessary repairs?
This essentially the tenant, if we were to take it from a textbook California law answer, would have a couple of options. If the landlord were to have received the written request in writing that the repairs be made, they have a reasonable time to make the repairs under California law. Richard correctly pointed out that that time is typically construed as 30 days, though depending on the nature of the repair, it could be sooner. If it's something, horrific, perhaps. At any rate, once the reasonable time period has expired, typically day 31 and beyond, the tenant would have some choices. The traditional choices are they could sue for damages if they would like. They could, by the way, a lot of these remedies are risky, and I don't necessarily advocate them. I'm just listing them off.
Right.
I'm going to start talking about the risky ones now. One of the typical remedies is that you could treat the lease as broken, that you owe no additional rent, and that you may leave. Again, try that at your own risk, but it is a potential remedy. Those are the two main ones that a tenant can expect to utilize. Again, suing for damages. Typically, if the damages are under $10,000, you would utilize small claims court to do that. More than $10,000, you would do a civil case, or they could, of course, treat the lease as broken and leave. Again, whenever you don't pay rent, however, that is risky. Oh, and of course, the third option I forgot, but is perhaps the most risky of all, which is that you can actually start withholding rent for lack of payment. Again, do it at your own risk. Anytime you're not paying your landlord, you're at enormous risk of an eviction. Keep very good records that you are doing this, why you are doing this, and that you've properly given notice. But those are the three remedies.
Thank you, Carl. Marshall, from the point of view of a city, as you know, the majority of the callers that come into Fair Housing Council Riverside County are low to moderate income. So when they are calling and they're having repair issues that are making a home, it's not uninhabitable, but they're definitely not being able to enjoy the full use of that home. What is there anything on the city's radar that can kind of help address that? Because this does seem to be a major issue that is even coming out of Moreno Valley. And I'm just wondering if that's on the radar.
Yes, just handled the call last week. So we continue to get those. And the difficult thing is, they're asking for repairs. They're not receiving the timely responses. Some of these projects, depending if it's managed by the city, meaning that they previously received funding from us, they're under an affordable housing agreement. We have different remedies that we can do in those situations. But typically what we end up doing is we'll bring in code enforcement or a third party to do a property inspection. We'll be looking at some of those items and we'll spot check the individual units, particularly if somebody has questioned that. In a typical affordable housing agreement, we're testing about 25% of the units on an annual basis, reviewing all the financials and the other components. But we have seen this uptick because as landlords are not receiving rent, their cash flow is limited. They're not doing some of the improvements. And some of these things end up on the outside. Homeless individuals living in hallways, different things. So it does come into that consideration of we're looking at health and safety issues. We're looking at our existing agreements with them and then utilizing our code enforcement teams to really enforce what needs to be done in these properties.
Thank you. That actually kind of leads into what my next question was going to be. But before I go into that, Mike, from the point of view of the owners, What kind of guidance does your association give to your members in terms of repairs and what their responsibilities are?
Right. So first and foremost, when our landlords, when they're getting ready to sign an agreement, the rental agreement, we have very specifically in our rental agreement, it's just be sure to have an open communication with your tenants regarding anything that may need repair, need updating, need all of those things. Because one of the things that our industry gets tagged often is because of habitability issues, or the house is now it becomes a code enforcement issue. And so, we regularly tell our landlords is stay in communication with your tenants. If there happens to be a problem, then allow them to create, set up a time where the owner, the property owner or manager can come to the unit, inspect specifically what that problem may be, and then go ahead and move forward with a plan of how to correct it and determine if the repair is significant enough where it may require the tenant to be relocated or to provide assistance to them while they're out of the unit. So for us, we want to make sure and we make it very clear that whenever you learn that there is going to be a problem that requires a repair, be very, be prompt about it, and also provide some insight, some guidance to the tenant goes how long it may take. Because as soon as you get into those, if you're not communicating or you're not, providing them a timeline of how or when the problem is going to, then that's all of a sudden you're going to, you can lead yourself into possible legal issues.
Thank you. So to follow up on what Marshall was saying, because it was a perfect segue into it, one of the other things that we are hearing a lot since COVID-19 hit are repairs can't be done because of social distancing, because of health issues and things like that. So we have two sides of the coin. We have the tenant who is not able to comfortably reside in their home because something's not working. And then we have the other side of repairs needing to be done. What guidance, and I'm going to open this up to everybody, what guidance can anybody give in those regards? And is COVID-19 a legitimate reason to not do repairs on a property?
Well, let me start off and give you kind of a generalization, because as we've been working with our Emergency Operations Center, we're handling a lot of the COVID-related instances. And from our plans and what we have to deal with is typically there is some resolution that can protect both parties. Just as the city has maintained operations, we've had staff operating in City Hall, maintenance crews, all of those items. There are proper protocols that can be followed to assure that all individuals are safe. So going back to whether it's CDC guidance or previously Riverside County Public Health had provided some guidance, we utilize those. And so we've been able to, even just with our inspectors, continue to do construction projects, move forward. It comes down many times to the simple things of facial coverings, social distancing, washing your hands, proper hygiene, all of those items. But I always defer back to county public health or the state. And as you know, with the state changing our level, they've provided new guidance up there on how every business can operate. Some of those are the maintenance operations. And now that we're at level red as of Tuesday, that should open up more opportunities for repairs that couldn't have been done before.
And we certainly allow let the tenants to know that they have a right to insist that anyone that enters their home does adhere to the proper health guidelines. And that certainly means masks, gloves is important, even booties. And we that the repair people who come in, that they don't touch anything other than what they need to be working on, and that they clean up afterwards, and limit their interaction with the people in the home, and make sure the people in the home are comfortable to have these people in and are properly social distance when they are in to do the repairs. But the first and foremost is that the repair people do adhere to the health guidelines completely.
Yeah, and I would like to add, I'd like to add that as well. So earlier this year, the National Apartment Association, they also created some recommended guidelines, but also we refer to our members, especially our supplier members, to refer to the local public health orders. And so that regards everything, regarding the PPE, social distancing, requirement of masks, booties if need be, also proper discontamination as well. So making sure everything is disinfected after they leave the unit. And also there would be also some cases where we have members where their employees are entering the unit, but the tenant insists on being there. So we also have protocols in place to make sure that, okay, if the tenant wants to be there to supervise and watch over what the repair and the procedure, that they can be there at a safe distance. Also, requiring maybe if under weather conditions permissible, making sure that there's proper ventilation. So all those things are considered and that are in our guidelines and also within the public health orders.
Thank you.
I'll
Do you have
throw
anything to add?
Yeah, I'll throw in 2 cents. I do predominantly tenant defense, but I'll hit both sides of the coin here. Subject to public health orders, et cetera. Keep in mind that landlords still retain the obligation to maintain the home, maintain standards of habitability. It must be fit for human occupation. Obligation to allow the landlord to make such repairs and to allow the landlord to enter the home subject to California law, which is typically with the giving of 24 hours written notice for a valid reason. So it cuts both ways. Landlords need to make the repairs, but tenants do need to facilitate the repairs. Of course, all of this with the backdrop of subject to the relevant public health orders, et cetera.
Thank you. So our next question will be primarily for Carl, and everybody else can jump in. This is something that since March, we have seen an increase on, particularly in the months of June and July. We saw a lot of complaints with this. And the question is, if a landlord or a property manager attempts to do a self-help eviction, what can a tenant do? We've had situations where locks were changed, utilities were disconnected. So what does a tenant do in that case when that happens?
Sure. Sadly, I see self-help eviction in my practice before COVID and an uptick of it during COVID, especially in cases where the tenant themselves has told the landlord that they have COVID-19. I've heard some pretty sad stories about those people being locked out of their home as a result of making that communication. So what can you do? Perhaps the first and foremost thing that you can and should do is call the police. It is a potential crime. It is not legal, criminal or civilly legal, for a landlord to undertake a self-help eviction, for them to lock you out on their own. Hopefully no one in this call has had to experience one, but knowing how these work, an eviction needs to be undertaken at the very least under the supervision of an armed sheriff. Oftentimes the armed sheriff does it himself. There are some situations where the sheriff supervises it, but nonetheless, the landlord should not be coming to you without having gone through all the legal processes of sending required notice, filing the documents with the court, having a court hearing, getting a judgment, enforcing that judgment with the sheriff. That is the proper procedure. If that is not being undertaken, the tenant can and should call the police, which hopefully and often does result in the police putting a stop to it. I've never unfortunately heard of it resulting in arrest or criminal charges despite its illegality, but nonetheless, police do sometimes put a stop to it if they're encountering it, and it's the first line of defense because it's the quickest response. Anything that you do legally is not going to be able to be done on the spot quite like the police can do. So that's why I recommend that as the first course of action. Secondarily, the tenant can begin looking at their legal courses of action. But again, these are slow. Nothing about the legal system is fast. You could look into perhaps restraining orders, but those are oftentimes not effective. Most of the time what you're going to have to do is sue civilly, utilize the civil court system, utilize the small claims system to sue for damages. Just catalog all the damages that you suffered as a result of the self-help eviction, maybe damages to your property, maybe the cost of having to find a new place to live, and sue. Sue in civil court if that amount is more than 10,000, sue in small claims if it's less.
Thank you. Mike, from a owner's perspective, what kind of guidance do you give your members regarding self-help evictions?
Well, in that respect, we do not advise. As a matter of fact, actually, we warn them, do not go down that road of doing anything regarding performing a self-help eviction. Whatever they do, if they're going to go down that road of doing an unlawful detainer, they have to do it according to the law. So in most cases, we'll say, contact an attorney. Contact an attorney and then get ready to file the necessary paperwork, and then get that, and get that paperwork paid for, processed, and then wait to see what happens for once it goes to court and if there's a judgment rendered. So before we even allow any of our members to even consider that, we strongly caution them, do not do that, because now you're going to be, like Carl said, now you're going to be opening yourself to far greater penalties, conviction, and then also on top of that being sued in civil court. So we tell them not to do that whatsoever. And as frustrating as the process may be, but that's the law, and there's no way getting around it.
Okay, thank you. In that same vein, something that I know has been happening for a while, but again, COVID sort of opened our eyes to quite a few things that we might not have recognized prior. One particular segment of society that appears to be impacted greatly right now are people who rent rooms. They rent rooms within homes, and under the Fair Housing Act, there are certain exceptions to those laws. But we're finding that people who have been renting homes, particularly when COVID first hit, they may leave to go to the grocery store, and when they came back in, they were locked out of the house because the owner who lived there said, "I don't feel safe, you've been out in public." What kind of guidance can we give to room renters that seem to fall through the cracks under all of the different rules and guidelines? And I'd like to pass that one over to Carl first, and then we'll go through.
Well, I'd like to echo the sentiments that I made in the previous answer. Even in this scenario, most of the things that I had mentioned in the previous answers still apply. It is a potential crime to commit a self-help eviction. There are potential civil liabilities for which you can sue, and in some cases you may be able to seek a restraining order as well. But from experience, that remedy is disfavored. Now, there are some minimal exceptions for room renters in which there's a single property owner, he resides in the home, and he rents out only a single room. But this is a very, very niche exception, which I do not find often in practice, and many of these rules, even in that niche scenario, still apply. There are exceptions, but quite frankly, I don't know them off the top of my head because it is so niche. I actually look those up every time I see it. I see it once every couple of years. Okay,
Richard, have you been seeing a lot of those calls lately?
Actually, I have been seeing those calls, ones I picked up and the other counselors have picked up, and it is frustrating. It's situations where there's just the conflicts, and whether they be COVID related or not, the situation is somewhat untenable for the person renting the room to be there. Again, the first thing that we can counsel is try to find other situations. That's easier said than done. But everybody realizes, if they're in a situation, they shouldn't be in that room. It depends on the type of retaliations that the landlord takes, and if it's any of those things that are illegal, the room renter has a right to call the police and report these type of extreme measures.
Right. So, Carl, this isn't actually a question. It's just sort of a comment on that. this one of the situations that I was referring to, the person did actually leave the house to go grocery shopping. When they came back, they could not get in. They did call the police. The police did come out and they told the owner that this individual had a right to be there. And the owner said, I don't care. They're not coming in. I'm not putting my life in danger. And that was the end of it. The police did not do anything more, which is one of the reasons why I'm concerned about this issue, because it's like they actually did the right thing, but they were still basically ended up pretty much homeless. They managed to be able to move in with a family member, but not everybody has a family member to go to. So we don't think of room renters when we think of a lot of the situations that come up. They tend to get forgotten. So it's something that I'm hoping gets on everybody's radar. And Marshall, I was wondering if you have seen or heard of those situations.
No, luckily those haven't crossed my path yet. A lot of those end up getting handled by other situations. But I will say, with the push for accessory dwelling units within the state, it's not just going to be that sole room renter, but it's going to be that accessory dwelling unit in your backyard that are now getting locked out. It's going to open up a whole new area of rental assistance that we need.
Is that something that the city of Moreno Valley is going to look at some of the rules and regulations on, or are you simply going to follow the state and county guidelines on that?
So in most cases, we try to follow the state and county, make sure that we're adhering to those. And it does get tricky when you're getting into landlord-tenant issues. Again, that's where we like to work with Fair Housing and other nonprofits, because that's not always our strength. It's not our daily expertise. We come in at different components with the health and safety areas for code enforcement, but landlord-tenant disputes are a very difficult, sensitive thing, and many times involve different legal issues that we can't address.
Right. So we're getting close to the end of the panel discussion, but I'd like to throw out one or two more questions, and then we'll go to the floor. And we'll begin here with Richard. And I'd like you to tell me how I, as a caller, as a resident, would know or could identify or even be an indication of that I was being discriminated against. How do I know when my fair housing rights are being violated?
Well, we kind of have to look to, again, at those protected classes, because those are the type of discriminations that we can actually investigate and file. And it is pretty broad range. You have the 7 protected classes under the Fair Housing Act, and under the state of California, even more. And California is very, very broad in what is permitted as a discrimination. But it's the question as to how are you being treated, and how are you being treated in relationship with others say if you're in an apartment, if your repairs are not being done in a different manner than others of a different class, protected class. And that's where we find a lot of the discrimination that we're able to, that we go to investigate further. And so, if you are a member of a protected class and you feel that there is a disparate treatment, we want to talk with you about it. And a lot of times the calls just come in as a landlord-tenant problem, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. But as we ask further questions to them, how are others in your conflict being treated? What kind of words are being used against you? Sometimes it's very, very blatant. Somebody will use a racial remark or a disparaging remark of a disability, or they'll hear others that talk amongst staffers that will refer to people in disparaging terms, and they may not really think that when they call in, but as we ask those questions, we are able to identify that yes, there is the possibility of discrimination here, and then our further investigations, we ask them to think of witnesses witnesses. Think of people that may have seen what has happened to you and would be willing to write about it, or others that have also experienced that. And that's what makes a stronger allegation to be investigated by Fair Housing Council. So it's just, it's your perception of how you're being treated, and that's what we ask our callers to consider.
Is it my responsibility to prove it? Do I have to have proof? Do I have to have proof that I'm being discriminated against, or can I call in and go through that process just because I feel like it, or it appears like I have been?
Yeah, no, we if it appears that, we will work. We'll help to do further investigations. We may even come to the point, that this probably is not an investigation, or is not an allegation. But if the client, the tenant, wants these things to be investigated by HUD, then we will pass those on to HUD on their behalf. So I mean, everyone has a right to have a discrimination investigated and reported.
Thank you. Carl, question for you. What advice would you give any tenants in the city of Moreno Valley right now moving forward, given all the things that we're looking at with COVID and rent moratoriums? What advice would you give to the residents of Moreno Valley?
Chiefly, if you can, if you can financially support it, continue to pay your rental obligations, continue to pay your mortgage obligations. Failure to do so, while there are options, they are probably not preferable to continuing the status quo if you are in the position and fortunate enough to be able to do that. If you are not in that position, you do have options, okay? And they usually come in the form of AB 3088 declarations to your landlord saying that you can't pay your rent. Remember that obligation exists every single month. You have to give them that declaration every single month. And before the expiration of this law, I believe at the end of January, you are responsible for paying 25% of your total rent. So please do not forget that obligation, because if you do, unfortunately, you may find yourself being evicted sometime in February or beyond. Lastly, cause is now required for most evictions. You shouldn't be getting a 60-day notice because they don't like your earrings, right? There should be an actual reason right now. Call an agency like ours if you received a 60-day notice and you believe is without cause, and we can help evaluate. Those are the main things I would suggest the residents of Moreno Valley look out for right now. And I'm sure our other advocates on the line will have their own insight into what they should be looking for as well.
All right, thank you, Carl. Mike, what advice would you give your members right now with all the issues that we've talked about today, from discrimination to repairs to moratoriums? What advice would you give to your members?
Well, so I would say the most important thing is there needs to be open dialogue between the tenants and the landlord themselves. So if there's an issue regarding COVID-19 and their inability to pay, there should be that comfortable, open communication where the tenant can reach out to the landlord, or likewise, the landlord, we even sometimes say landlords even reach out to their tenant and go, how are you doing? How are things going? And then if it becomes a situation where, yes, now the tenant is facing financial difficulty, is how can we work this out between each other so we don't go down the road of even having to perform an unlawful detainer. In many cases, we tell our members to exhaust every other avenue other than trying to go through the eviction process, because it's very time consuming. It's also expensive. And also we're seeing, in some cases, even with our members down here in San Diego County, the landlord may have done everything correctly in terms of to follow through with that unlawful detainer. However, the judge will say, but we're in a housing crisis right now. We're in a situation right now, this person has nowhere to go. I can't grant it at this time until the situation changes. So we're, some of our members are experiencing that. So rather than, look at any other avenue, whether it's through a payment plan, we encourage our members to go that route. But at least what we're finding out is that the majority of our members are facing little issue with their tenants who are affected by COVID-19 and inability to pay. They're going along that route to find an avenue to keep them to keep the tenants staying in their rental unit. The issue that we're concerned with, that we're seeing a lot of now, is that in particular cases for a couple of our property managers, they have a tenant who is now posing a safety and a public health threat to their tenants around them. To the case of that, police are called multiple times. They're obviously demonstrating that they're a threat not only to maybe the tenants in their unit, but also to the neighbors around them through intimidation, through noise, through verbal threats, all of those things. And so that's even difficult. And so that's even taking a few months before finally the judge will say, all right, you have actually grounds to evict this particular tenant.
Great, thank you. Marshall, from the point of view of the city, what advice or what would you like to tell your tenants, the residents of Moreno Valley, to keep in mind as we move forward through this pandemic and through all the issues that keep coming up because of it?
Well, without echoing the other comments, one of the areas I've looked at is we've had to make sure that we're addressing the business needs and the tenant needs. And so from that, I really encourage everyone, no matter what capacity you're in, to become familiar with what programs are available out there, because a rental assistance program helps both parties. And a lot of this stuff right now is driven by really fiscal distress for those individuals, typically caused by COVID. And there are programs out there that can support in many different means. The other things, just to kind of go off on a side tangent, is we have an employment resource center in Moreno Valley. And so where those individuals have lost their employment and they're looking for alternatives, that's one thing that we've kept open through this whole pandemic. And that's been useful for unemployment, so that they could get that additional financial support, but also for finding new jobs. And I think that's kind of critical from all aspects, is as you're looking to come out of this and you've lost your unemployment, you need to work with your landlords, have that open communication, but there's also different solutions that can be found to really get the end result, so that when we get to February and there's no more protections, at least you're in a better financial situation at that point in time.
Great. Thank you so much, Marshall. And finally, Richard, for you, in terms of the residents of Moreno Valley, what would you like to tell them regarding either the discrimination issues that they may or may not be experiencing, their issues that they have with their landlords and tenants? What advice can you give to them moving forward?
Well, we just like to let them know, to assure them that they do have protections, and many times they'll be calling and just not even know what's on the books, the current moratoriums, and they just aren't aware, and they think that I'm going to be thrown out in the next 3 days or whatever. And they just need to know that there are protections in place and that there are resources in place. And we have those lists of resources, and we've learned a lot. All of us have learned a lot more of what is out there for people. So it's a calming effect that our counselors have to give to the people that call in, that they have protections. There are protections in place for their residency, and very, very important, there are protections in place if they're facing discrimination. That they're not alone here, and they have their rights. So it's a very tough time for everybody, but at the end of the call, many people are just very thankful. I didn't realize that. Thank you. You made me feel better. That makes it all worthwhile.
Great. Thank you. So we have one question in the panel box, and it is for Carl. And I'm not sure it's one, well, no, I think you can answer it. It said that the citizenship requirement for legal aid, what is required and is self-certification allowed?
Sure. So for specifically referring to Inland County's legal services, our organization, this doesn't encompass any other organization. We do have a citizenship requirement for service. This can, of course, be met by being a citizen. There are other ways in which it can be met also. There are several exceptions. It does include permanent residency, and in some instances, especially under the Violence Against Women Act, the VAWA, we can assist those who are not citizens at all. So I had mentioned it in brief and in passing. It wasn't a very detailed answer. We do help a number of people, not just full-fledged citizens. In addition, for the most part, there are some exceptions. We do only require self-certification. So if you were to say you're a citizen, we take your word for it. What are we going to do? We're not going to upend your personal records to find out. We take your word.
Perfect. So there are no other questions on here. And gentlemen, I'd like to thank all four of you for being on today for this virtual town hall. I believe that a lot of really important information was shared and it gave a lot for all of us to think about. I would like to remind everybody that this will be posted for rebroadcast. And I would like to end with closing statements. And so we'll go ahead and we'll go in reverse order. Mike, why don't you go first and we'll go backwards. Any closing statements?
Well, quickly, I just want to, in terms of our organization, we believe that, when you're becoming a landlord, whether it's your property manager or an independent rental owner, that you need to, California is a renter-friendly state, and when you need to become, when you entering in this sector, you need to follow the letter of the law. You need to also be very careful in what you do, what questions you ask, and in how and what and also determining of your rental criteria, for example. So, and then also we tell them, just because you've been a landlord for the last 30 years, don't expect that things are going to stay stagnant. The last 18 months, our industry has gone through incredible changes in terms of, AB 1482, now AB 3088. Now we have the CDC rule. Now we also, other laws that have been passed in previous years. And there's also local ordinances that, maybe specific to the city of San Diego. And we tell them, educate yourself and please be informed. And if you have a question, to contact us. And also in terms of regarding right now with the pandemic is, as we're looking for solutions to alleviate or remedy, the impact to tenants, also we have to look at landlords as well. And so, one of the things that we talked about is, the renter assistance programs. If you're going to assist tenants, there also needs to be something in place that will also assist landlords, because many of our landlords, we did a survey back in June, and we had one third of our members, our small rental owners, said we have about 30 days of surplus of backup revenues. And if anything moves beyond 30 days, then we're going to be in trouble. Now, mind you, we've had the stimulus, there's also the unemployment. So there's other things been put in place, the eviction moratoriums. But, bottom line, we need a solution that can't just address part of the problem. We need something that's going to address the entire problem.
Thank you. And again, Mike, thank you for joining us today. The Fair Housing Council Riverside County absolutely appreciates your participation.
Thank you for having me.
And I know all of our listeners will as well. Carl, any closing statements?
Well, first and foremost, thank you all for having me. Thank you all for having ICLS here today. Both myself and our ICLS, we really enjoy these. We're happy to be here. Thank you. Next, if you are encountering any housing related issues, please feel to reach out to us. Our contact number, toll free, costs you nothing. And if you are approved for services, our services cost nothing. Our toll free number is 1-888-245-5444. 4257. In many areas of the law, not just housing, we provide at the very least consultant advice if you qualify. If for some reason we are not the right agency to assist you, we do our best to refer you to an agency who is. Perhaps some of the agencies represented here today, as well as other fine institutions. With that said, thank you.
Thank you very much. Marshall, for the city of Moreno Valley, one, I would like to thank you for your participation today. I know your time is very valuable and it's greatly appreciated. And I'd like to open it up to you for a final closing statement.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here today. And I think, the biggest thing from the city's perspective is there are many programs, there are many partners in the community that we work with, whether it's through Riverside County or it's the nonprofits throughout the county that we work hand in hand with. And really the goal always is to make sure that individuals that are in any situation that they feel distressed, that they're aware that there are resources. And so one of the things we want to make sure they go to is, look at the city's website. We do have nonprofit partners listed up there. We have all the agencies listed that provide or receive any of the federal funds that we receive to help support these programs. And it's good to have those connections, have that information. And if there's anything else, then you can always reach out to various departments of the city, whether it's code enforcement or myself or the housing group. We can assist with those future needs as needed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Richard, for Fair Housing Council of Riverside County, last closing statements to close us out.
Alrighty, well, it's been a very, very good session, and I appreciate all my co-panelists. And we just want the public to know that the Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is always open and available to you. We have a policy that our Executive Director, Rose Mays, who's been with us since 1993, has a solid edict. Our phones are answered. They're answered live. And you will always have an opportunity to speak to a counselor. Our business hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And any time that you call during that time period, you will speak to a live person. And we will do everything in our power to assist you and to answer your questions and to refer you to the different resources that may be available, and to help to just calm your fears and your trepidations at a very, very difficult time.
Thank you, Richard. On behalf of Fair Housing Council of Riverside County, all of our panelists, we'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to spend with us. Hopefully you found this information valuable and that you've gained some insight into resources that are out there. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about all of the resources that are available. So reach out, talk to one of us, and we'll definitely make sure that you get the help that you need. We are here for you, and that was the purpose of this town hall meeting. And I thank each of you for your time. Richard, Mike, Marshall, Carl, thank you very much. And with that, I bid everybody a very nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.